Hey, Jennifer, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, glad to be here.
So I'm really excited to talk to you today because you talk about and are focused as an expert in an area which a lot of people struggle, which is financial information in general. There's all kind of issues around that when people are starting a business, and we're going to deep dive into some of those things, maybe some key tactics and tools that might be able to help people. But before we do that, the whole purpose of this podcast is to talk about building a business that lasts. How have you learned over time to build a team and kind of get to where you are? I love to just hear from you some key struggles you've had to overcome, some key successes that you've kind of landed on. Tell us a little bit about kind of where you got to where you are in your business journey.
Sure. So I think like a lot of professional service providers, which is how I would categorize myself, because we're providing services, we're not building products or doing anything like that. I started out independently. And there comes a point at which you can only do so much work yourself without having to hire people. And that, I think, for a lot of professional service providers is the first big crossroad, which is am I going to continue to be independent? Because there's some real pros to that. Or am I going to figure out how to scale, get more work done? That could mean hiring people, that could be outsourcing, it could mean different things depending upon what you're doing. So for me, that was the real turning point, was deciding that I wanted to have a team. For a lot of folks, that's also the point that their independent job becomes an actual company. And then there are a number of things that go with making that transition, which pros and cons, but there's a lot of really good things about it. There's a lot of ongoing value building that you are able to do once you make that change. And so from a longer term business company perspective, there's a lot of benefits to people who are ready to make that transition, and some real immediate gratification and value elements that they get from doing that. So for me, that was my big step. Really was adding that team, and the things that have come from being able to do that. There is an exponential value in having other people's thoughts and contributions to the business as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And anybody who is starting a business at some point is going to have to make that decision. Yep. I mean, the idea of what you just said, which I think is really important, is taking it from a job to a company. I think a lot of people start a small business, or they go out on their own as a freelancer or independent or whatever you want to call it, with the idea that they're going to free up their schedule and have more time, and they're going to increase their bank account and have more money. And what happens very often for a lot of people, including me at times, was it's the opposite of that. You have no time, and sometimes you have no money because you don't know how to run an actual business. And all you're really doing is you just have a job for a lot of bosses if you have multiple clients instead of just one boss. And you don't have the consistency and reliability that comes with being a team member at a company somewhere. So when you started to make that decision, you said, all right, you've decided, I want to have a team. I'm going to start hiring people. Now, I didn't do this very well at the very beginning. I made some pretty big mistakes trying to figure this out. How did you do when you first started figuring out that team and bringing people on board? What helped you hire the right people, and what have you learned along the way from that process?
So I'm much better at hiring now than I was in the beginning. And I came into my company with an extensive corporate background. So I had hired people, I had managed people, but I had done so for a large company and not in my own company. And so I think that's the first thing that I learned, was how I needed to hire for my company was different than the hiring I had done in the past, even though most of the work that we were doing was similar to the work that I had hired for historically. So I think one of my big lessons was you can't underestimate the change in the company environment when it comes to looking at the folks that you're going to hire. For me personally, it was a better route that I had somebody on the front end. So I had a recruiter who helped me. And I think the biggest reason that I did that, I will say this now, and I do think it was always true. The biggest reason that I did that is because I knew where my weaknesses were in the hiring process. So for me, I would lose a lot of time and energy at the front end of the hiring process and then just be like, that's it, I'm done. I'm either not going to hire anybody or I ended up hiring the wrong person.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Because you just get worn out and you're like, oh, now I got another full-time job hiring people.
Right.
Right. So that was, I think you really have to, if you can, and sometimes you can't, but if you can figure out where you as the hiring person, as the business owner, are most likely to trip over yourself, then get some help. Like if you think you're not going to call their references or do the background checks, then find somebody else to do that for you.
Yeah, I think that's so important. You know, so often people focus on the idea of trying to improve their weaknesses, which maybe that's a weakness for you. It certainly is for me, of trying to find that right person and do all the, especially all those detailed things up front are just not, it's not for me. And they think, well, I'm just going to do it myself because it'll be cheaper and I can do it right, allegedly. But the problem is, and I think this is an old Dale Carnegie principle, I'm not sure where I stole it from, but if we're a 2 at something out of 10 and we really work hard and we improve it to a 4, we're still pretty bad. You know?
That's right.
But if we're a 7 and we focus on the things that we're 7s at and make them 10s, we're experts. We're the best that we could possibly be. And so that's been a big thing for me, especially over the last few years, is what are the things that I can do, that I actually want to do? They're in my desire zone. I'm good at them. They're my proficiency zone. That's where I need to be. And everything else, I got to find somebody else to help alleviate that. So you kind of did that by trying to find a recruiter to help you build that team initially.
Yep.
And that doesn't always go right either. I mean, none of these things are perfect from a execution standpoint when we're trying to grow a team. But what you just said, which is be willing to get the help that you need in whatever area that is. I waited way too long in so many areas where I should have gone, hey, I need to find an expert to take care of this thing for me. I mean, shoot, I sent out my own invoices for way too long.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's like, I don't want to let go of those pieces of the puzzle. But it was foolish because I was missing stuff that was costing thousands of dollars at one point. Thankfully that's all fixed now. So hiring obviously is a big transition when you're growing a business. Trying to build that team is hard work. Making that decision to do it in the first place is hard. But if you're going to allow the business to actually be a company, like you said, and operate without you, you have to have that team. What other things have you learned along the way that you've kind of gone, okay, these are things I wasn't expecting to have to deal with, that I didn't have to deal with when I was an employee somewhere, but I now have to deal with that I'm an owner? What have been some of those things along the way?
I think one of the biggest transitions that people have to make is also, I think there's a couple of them. One is how many hats you do truly wear at any given point in the day. And as the CEO, as the company owner, as whatever title you want to put at the top part of the pyramid, you're going to get to do that. And that's just going to be the way that it is, really, regardless of no matter how many people you hire, there are always going to be those decisions that you have to make. So I think as a business owner, one of the biggest things is really coming to terms with how many decisions you're going to have to make and minimizing those where you can. So here's an easy example. I loved your invoicing comment. So I waited a long time to do that. And I don't know if it was harder for me to hire somebody to do that because I'm in that field. I'm like, well, I should be even better at it.
Right.
But for a very long period of time, even after I hired somebody to do it, we have a lot of clients that are on monthly retainers. And we would go through the client list every single month. And I'm like, nothing's changed, nothing's changed. And I bet it took us 2 years before I said, can we just automate this so that these automatically go out on the first of the month? Versus, so I wasn't sending the invoices out, but she was. So she was manually sending them out. And so now they go out like at 2 a.m. on the first of the month and nobody has to do anything. So I think there are even those, what can seem like minor elements, if you have to have a conversation about it and you really find yourself having the conversations all the time, because that's part of your business, not because you have a problem with a client or a person or anything like that, really trying to automate that stuff, it helps. And there's a lot of other reasons for automation, but I think one of the reasons that we forget the most is because you only have so much time and so much energy. And if you're using it to have a conversation about, yeah, all the invoices are the same again this month, that's time and energy. You don't have to have another conversation. And I think I know there's some studies out there that whether it's decision making or willpower or whatever it is, and it goes with the power of habit. And that is, the less of those things that you have to make decisions about, whether it's you wear the same thing every day or you ate the same breakfast, the more energy you have left to go throughout your day, and for other parts of your business. So that's really one of the biggest things that I have learned. And that feeds right into what you were saying, right? Is it in my desire zone? Is it in my zone of excellence? Is this where I can add the most value? And trying to marry those things as much as possible, not only makes your company better, but I think it makes you happier as the person who's in charge of the company.
Yeah, there's three key things there that you kind of hit on that I think are fundamental to growing a business that lasts. One is you got to find ways to simplify particular areas. Two is you got to find ways to automate things. And three is you need recurring revenue. You didn't specifically say that, but you talked about retainers, and that is within that wheelhouse, which I want to come back to. On the simplify thing, the most extreme example of that is somebody like Steve Jobs, who literally had a closet full of black turtlenecks and the same pair of jeans because that was one decision he wasn't going to make every day.
That's right.
The other really good story that I've heard on that is Warren Buffett. And allegedly, his wife puts out 2 sets of change in the morning for his breakfast that he stops at McDonald's apparently every morning. There's 2 different breakfasts. One is like $2.73. Another is like $1.83. And if the market's up, he uses the $1.83. I'm sorry, if the market's up, he uses the $2.73. If the market's down, he uses the $1.83. So here's a multi-billionaire, one of the richest men in the world, making decisions off of a dollar. But he doesn't make decisions on it. He knows exactly what he's going to eat. He knows where he's going to stop. He knows how long it's going to take. It's not part of his process. And that seems kind of like crazy to some people, but I think at that level, if you're going to end up being not that many of us are going to end up being Steve Jobs or Warren Buffett's, but there is something to take from that and kind of go, how can I simplify what I'm doing? The other thing that you hit on, which I think is really important, is the automation thing. Somebody taught me this process one time a while back, and it was really helpful. It's 4 questions. One is, do I have to do it? In other words, or even does it have to be done even, is the first question. 2 is, can I automate it, which is what you were talking about. 3 is, can I delegate it to somebody else? And 4 is, does it have to be done now? And that's kind of the 4-part test of like, when to do what and what needs to be happening. But I'd like to circle in specifically on recurring revenue, because I think that this is like the bread and butter for a lot of businesses that are missing out on thinking about this as an idea. Is there a place in my business that I can generate recurring revenue? And I've found that most businesses, the answer is probably yes somewhere. They may have to come up with some kind of special plan or package or something else they can provide ongoing value. But years ago, my uncle told me, look, everything you're doing is project-based. So you're making $1,000 here or $5,000 there or whatever it was back when I was 19 years old. But every month you're starting over. Every year you're starting from zero. How can you generate recurring revenue? And back then I remember the first thing we ever sold was a hosting account for a website. It was $10 a month and it cost me $4 a month. So I made $6 a month on it. That was the first thing that we ever sold. It was I had $10 a month in recurring revenue. So it was like $120 a year. Well, now we've got like $1.5 million in recurring revenue every year. And it makes me sleep a lot better at night when I know that all the basics are covered just by waking up in the morning and doing the work that's already promised to be done. So talk about that a little bit, recurring revenue, how that kind of works for you from a retainer basis. Is your whole business recurring revenue? Is just parts of it? And then how do you advise clients from a financial standpoint as to how to handle those things?
So really from a basic recurring revenue perspective, I completely agree with your comment that somewhere in every business, there is an opportunity for recurring revenue. And in a perfect math world, it's exactly what you said, and that is, if you can get your recurring revenue to cover your basics, you'll sleep a lot better at night.
Mm-hmm.
And that cannot be overstated on how valuable being able to sleep at night is. The other thing, and related to that, is that it allows you to do some other things in your business that you wouldn't otherwise have the bandwidth to do, whether that's from a creative perspective or whether that's from an operating perspective. There's all different sorts of elements to that. But, if you're out there hustling for every dollar that comes in every single month, then you've got a lot of time and energy devoted to hustling. And then the other 50% of your energy is devoted to fulfilling that. And that's even more true if it's just you right now, right? And in the early days, it is for a lot of people. So there's that element to it as well. Our particular business model has both recurring revenue elements to it as well as project-based elements. And sometimes those overlap. We'll do both types of work for our clients. In some cases, we just do recurring revenue work, and in some cases, we're just doing project-based work. We have a lot of, and I'm going to make a clarifying comment here. We have a lot of strategic partners that we work with so that we have a fairly good, consistent pipeline from them, even if the end user is different. But I think what can happen to some businesses is that they have ongoing customers. And one of the best examples of that is a lot of our clients are in, say, a construction type industry or something like that. And they have home builders that they do work for. So those home builders are a customer, and they build multiple houses a year. And so our client can do work on multiple houses. But there is a difference between a stable customer list and recurring revenue. And I think a lot of businesses can confuse those two. And one of the reasons, there's several reasons, and certainly financial ones, but from a customer management perspective, you still have to get new projects, go with those customers. You're kind of at the mercy of their business versus having a recurring revenue model where it comes in and it's something that they rely on, and you know that it's coming in. And that doesn't mean you don't have any turnover, but it's dramatically different than if you're still just doing project-based work or getting orders from them. So let's say you sell a product and they order, they've been ordering 100 of your product month in and month out for the last 3 years. It could still drop to 50 or 0, depending upon what they're able to sell. So I think that's an important distinction. And there's a spectrum, right? So there's the one-time project work, there's the ongoing customers, and then there's recurring revenue. And there's value to businesses for all of those different types.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I was actually having a conversation. I was doing some consulting with another business owner the other day, and that I was talking about this very issue. And I said, well, tell me about your recurring revenue. Well, we've got all these clients that, bring us work on a regular basis. I'm like, that's great. That's not recurring revenue. I mean, it recurs and it is revenue, but it's not the same thing as I have a 12-month agreement. They're going to pay me X number of dollars a month for the next 12 months, and then we're going to renew that agreement. Because that allows you, especially from a financial perspective, to forecast what's going to happen. I can't forecast the hope that a client might do business with me. I can forecast the fact that I have 10 contracts at $1,000 a month over 12 months. I know exactly how many dollars that is. And I can tell what's going to happen. Now, it might have somebody that cancels or goes out of business or something else, but you at least have an agreement up front that assumes everybody's going to abide by that agreement and carry that through. So that's a really important distinction for anybody that's listening that has not thought about that before, because Gosh, there's nothing that has made me feel more comfortable in business in the right ways, not in a complacent way, but in a way like, okay, now I can focus on the things I need to focus on
Right.
versus like, where's the next sale? Where's the next sale? Where's the next
Mm-hmm.
sale? And then that can be where a lot of people end up. And most people hate that because most people didn't sign up to be in the sales business. They don't
That's
want to
right.
be salespeople. They want to be whatever they are. They want to be the best cupcake maker in town, but they have to go sell cupcakes. And they're like, well, I thought I just had to bake them. I don't want to have to sell them. But if you have some kind of a recurring agreement, even if something as silly as that is making cupcakes, if you got a provider that you're dropping off every single week X number of cupcakes for X number of dollars, and they have an agreement and that's the plan, that is way better than knowing I have so many people coming in over time. That's a really good clarification. Thanks for making that. So I was looking at your website, which I love, by the way, and I do websites, so that's a compliment, an actual compliment. And I love your brand and the colors and the way everything's put together and the clarity of messaging. It says financial advisors with a flair for the feminine. So you're very focused on, hey, we want to help with accounting, planning, and transactional strategies for women-led businesses. So deciding on that niche, because you are deciding on a niche there from a percentage standpoint, is an intentional decision. A lot of people are deciding whether they should do a niche or not. It could be industry related. It could be, focusing on women-led businesses or veteran-led businesses or whatever. There's all kinds of different ways to kind of focus that. Did you do that from the very beginning, or was that a niche decision you decided to transition to focus the business? What's your thought process on how you came up with that decision?
Yeah, I did not do that from the very beginning. And the thought process behind it was the industry in which my company is based is very male dominated. And I think there's plenty of people that can say that about their industries too, right? But it's very male dominated. And one of the things that I was seeing was, and is, that there are more and more women-owned businesses that are growing to the size where they need this type of advice. And just from a pure comfort perspective, having not really been around a lot of that type of activity, that it's a natural fit for us. So I own a women-owned, I have my own company as a woman. The people that work for me are women. It's easy for me to understand some of the challenges that women have. It's also easy for me to understand how they're building their businesses. So they have a huge focus on long-term value, corporate culture, some of those elements. And most of them, and there's a lot of statistics on this, most of them have bootstrapped their companies. So they didn't go into starting their companies looking for any sort of funding or even having that as part of their mindset. So as their companies have grown and they're considering those other options, it's a whole new world for them. And it can be a little intimidating. There's no question. There's jargon in the financial world, just like there is in any world. And it's just one of those elements where we think we can provide a lot of value.
Yeah, I think I think the niching is smart. A lot of people are talking about that as like, if you want to scale a business, focus on a particular niche. I've never actually done that, even industry specific, which it would be easier for us to run a marketing agency if we were focused on a particular vertical. Because what I don't like about industry specific verticals sometimes is your business is often subject to that vertical's economy. And so if I had just done real estate websites, for example, in 2007, as that economy collapsed, my economy would have collapsed too, and I would have had to have tried to buffer that accordingly. The beauty of doing the focus that you have is you still have vast diversity with regards to the potential type of business that they're running, but you're still clarifying your message in a way that somebody reads it and goes, oh, this looks like something that's for me. Seth Godin, from a marketing perspective, always talks about how people like to buy things that other people like them buy, basically. Like, people like me do things like this. And so if they can look at the website and go, these people look like me, they do things like this, that's something that I can do as well. I think that's really smart strategy. So nice work with that. When you think about where small business owners get stuck. We're talking about financial stuff specifically. So let's talk about like your area of expertise.
Sure.
There's 1,000 places to mess it up. I certainly have messed it up along the way. But where do you see like the biggest problems when people come to you and you're like, oh gosh, you're missing this. And then when you help resolve some of those things for them or take it off of their plate, maybe it just makes their life so much better and their business flourish in a way that maybe it hasn't before. Where are they getting stuck initially?
So, and I think this is more true if you've got a company that has employees. I think it's true regardless. But I think the pain is greater if you have employees and it's cash flow. And the reason that it's greater if you have employees is because you have to make payroll. And there will be nothing that keeps people up more at night than how am I going to make payroll and how am I going to pay those payroll taxes? You have flexibility with vendors at times. You never have flexibility with payroll. And some of that goes back to our recurring revenue conversation as well. So if you have recurring revenue coming in, it's easier for you to plan. It's easier for you to know how you're going to have payroll covered. It's all of those types of things. A lot of companies have situations also where they have to do a bunch of work and then issue an invoice and then get paid, right? So the cash conversion cycle is what that's called, which is how long does it take me to get the money back in the door from when I sent it out the door? So if I sent it out the door for payroll or I sent it out the door because I had to buy products or whatever it is, how long does it take you to do whatever you need to do with it, send the invoice out and get paid by your customer? And that lag is what just kills businesses and business owners, and not understanding how that can work. And that is true always. But one of the most interesting things that I think people miss is that is even more true if you're in a high growth phase. So a lot of our clients have come to us and are like, we're growing by leaps and bounds. We've opened these other locations. We have all of these customers and look. And I'm like, okay, and you also did these things that cost you this much more money. You signed a new lease, you hired new people. You've got these extended payment plans. All of these different decisions that they made that start snowballing on top of themselves, and it's at some level, it's what, back in the day we would call the Oprah effect. Today we would call it the Shark Tank effect. You're so wildly successful it kills you.
Yeah. And, I laugh because I have been there right on the edge of like, I am going to run out of money. How am I going to run out of money? We're making more money than we've ever made. How is this possible? How do I not have enough cash? I don't understand. And it really was not, I had some help. I have an internal office admin who does a lot of work. Then I had an external bookkeeper who helped kind of keep the taxes and accounting. And I had a CPA, but he really only looked at it like once a year.
Yeah.
So a little over a year ago, I switched to, and I think this is kind of the work that y'all do, I switched to basically like a virtual CFO is what I would kind of classify them as. And all of a sudden I start to see things and have data that I didn't have before. And now I can make decisions better because we are like, even though we're 20 years in, we're still in a high growth season right now. Yep. And, we're up about 36% over last year, which is great for our 20th year in a row of business. But there have been times like in the not too far past, within the last 24 months where I was like, gosh, how am I going to like float all this and get to where we're going? I don't really want to take money on my own accounts to have to float the business. I shouldn't be doing that at this point. But to your point, if you don't know how those things operate, you don't have the data around that. And most of us as small business owners, even me, who's been doing this since I was 17 years old, there are a lot of things around cash flow and understanding. I understand my P&L, but your P&L can show profitability and not have cash in the bank. So really important.
And one of the other related elements to that, so I talked about the cash conversion cycle, is understanding if you have highly variable revenue And that could be month to month, or that could be week to week. But you have highly fixed expenses. That also creates this mismatch. And it's I think it's hard when you're in the middle of it. So to your point about having a virtual CFO, you now can be less in the middle of it and have the opportunity to look at the information and see aspects of the data or trends that you couldn't see when you were buried in the middle of it.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, which is hire out your weaknesses. I'm not a CPA. I'm not a CFO. Those are not my strengths. I'm a marketer. I can help people with their messaging. I can help people strategize their business. I can help them understand the structure of the whole of how that should operate and get attention and acquire customers. But when it comes down to like balance sheet versus cash flow statement versus everything else and figuring out what needs to be in what account when and how that needs to operate, I need somebody else to help with that. And it really took me way too long to figure that out. And so I think that's really good counsel for people that are listening. We probably talk about this stuff forever because there's 1,000 things to talk about as it relates to financials, but I want to transition because we got to wrap up the show at some point. And I want to talk about the one thing I always talk about, which is work-life balance. Yep. I don't love that title that much, but it's the title we kind of reference it by. It's the reality of work that needs to be done, especially as an entrepreneur. And everything else in life, whatever that looks a little different for everybody. Some people have kids, some people have spouses, some people have friends, some people have hobbies. But how have you over time kind of gone, hey, this is the right balance, if that's even the right word, for you? And what kind of things have you done to help improve that in your own life?
So the biggest thing for me has been being honest with myself about what I think that really means. So, you know, even when I was in corporate, and it's certainly been true in my own business, and that is that for me personally, I would rather be attuned and plugged in all the time at a minimum level. I'm going to think about it anyway. So if I'm going to think about it anyway, and my work, my job, my company is going to get that mind space, then it should be productive mind space. And I think in fairness to yourself, you have to be willing to be honest about it. Otherwise, you just beat yourself up, and where's that going to get you? So for me, I do a lot of travel. My children are a little bit older now. I have a senior in high school and a sophomore in college. So that provides a certain amount of flexibility that if you have a 5 and a 7-year-old is not the same.
Which I do.
So and there are just those seasons of life is That's the right. other thing that I think everybody really has to understand.
Yeah.
You know, 10 years ago, what worked for me on the diet and exercise front worked for me 10 years ago, and it doesn't work for me now. And I think we all get stuck in our patterns of believing that if we were highly successful utilizing some method 5 years ago, that it should work for us today, whether that's work-life balance or whether it's business related or just personal related. And it doesn't work like that. So I think you also have to be willing to let go of those things that aren't working for you anymore and be okay with that. And just know, you know what, this is a different season of my life, and I'm fine with that. So my biggest indulgence is traveling. I am a huge fan of that. I do it personally. I do it with my husband. We do it with our kids. So we have all of a different kind of mix of that. And then I know people who hate traveling, so that wouldn't be their thing. For me, that's what I derive a lot of pleasure out of. And that's my ability to do that is my biggest measure of work-life balance.
That's good. And I think what you said at the beginning there of being honest with yourself is really important. I think it's easy to want to tell ourselves a story that's not really true. And I think the seasons of life stuff is huge. I mean, I have 5 kids who range from 6 years old to almost 15 years old. I'm sorry, she's actually turned 7 yesterday. So she's 7 now. From 7 years old to almost 15 years old. And we're in a busy season right now.
That's right.
And so like people are like, well, Jay, if you would do this and show up at this event and do this thing, you could really grow your business. I'm like, I know. Like I know how to make more money. That's not the issue. I want to be at home for dinner most nights. Not every night, but most nights I want to be there. And most days I'm there in the mornings, and that's a decision I've made for this season. But 10 years from now, when my 7-year-old is 17, that may be very different. I want to do a lot of speaking and traveling, and I don't have to be at home as much at that point. So I think that seasons of life thing is absolutely critical. So as we kind of wrap up here and land the plane a little bit, and you're thinking about talking into somebody who wants to build a business that lasts, that's why they're on the podcast right now. After all, they're trying to find stories, tips, and ideas to avoid being worn out, stressed out, and ready to quit. What parting advice would you give them to kind of take away from this episode?
I think the biggest thing is to be as clear about your end goal as you can, and to also realize that may just get you through the next 6 months. So I see a lot of business owners who have their 2-year plan or their 5-year plan, and that's really publicized. I mean, that's a big thing in the media, and my gosh, we're getting ready to come to the end of the year, and you can't hardly open up at anything and not see the ready for 2020 kind of thing coming, right? So I think all of that's really good. But I also think that there's a huge value to 30, 60, and 90-day goals and pivoting and course correcting as you go. So in general, know that you're trying to get to a certain place in your business, but also understand that there are seasons in business too. And sometimes it's going to click, it's going to go really fast. You're going to feel like you're on fire in a good way. And other times you're going to feel like you're walking through quicksand. And being okay with that and knowing that it's just part of the process is important. Also knowing that you can't go around that process. You have to go through it, and your goal is to get through it as fast as you can. So that goes back to the hire expertise where you need it. And you can do that in little short segments. You don't have to commit to some giant program or process or any of that. You can get it as you need it, and being willing to do that will help your process go a lot faster, so you don't feel like you're walking through quicksand.
Yeah, I love that. Have a big vision, but that 30, 60, 90-day goals, I think, are so much more important, and just being clear about where you want to go, and being willing to look back at it and go, hey, it might change. I mean, I have big goals for the next 2, 5, 10 years, but I also know I might change that in 6 months, and it might look totally different based on what's going on, because we never know what life is going to deal us along the way. I heard a great quote from one of the guys who helps run Chick-fil-A. I think his name's Mark Miller, and he said, we can't control what opportunities are given to us, but we can control if we're ready for them or not when they get there. And I was like, that's pretty good. So being prepared for where we're going and what we want to do is really great. Jennifer, thank you so much for being on the show today. If people want to find you online, where's the best place for them to look?
So the best place is our website, which is peakadvisory.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been a pleasure. I think it'll be a real value for those who listen.
Thank you very much.
Hey, I hope this video has helped you with some tips and ideas to build a business that lasts. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on the next videos that we roll out. And more importantly, for some awesome free resources, head over to our website at buildingabusinessthatlasts.com. You can get a free copy of my book there, where I tell you how I have built an agency that's grown year over year for the last 20 years in a row. So go grab that, buildingabusinessthatlasts.com, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thanks. We'll see you soon.